Good afternoon. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper IO, and I'm here today with Jeff Roberts, the co-founder of Outseta. Good afternoon, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well. We both have a little musical background here today.
I can see that. We got a common theme going on here. You have the orchestra and I have the brass band. So
Yeah, yours is a little bit cooler than mine, but they're both very good. So, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
sure. Um, so I've been working with startup SaaS companies at this point for just over 10 years. Actually, this May was sort of my 10-year anniversary in this field. But long story short, I never expected to work for a tech company. I was a writing major in college, got out of school as the economy was kind of crashing in 2008, ended up going back to business school and eventually found myself looking for employment down in Boston, stumbled across a company that's called Buildium. It's the word build and then IUM on the end. When it was just a startup company of about 7 or 8 employees. To be perfectly frank, I had no real interest in tech, no real interest in software, but I needed a job. And I kind of stumbled into a great situation. So I ended up working the first 5 years of my career at Buildium. I was their first full-time marketing hire. And little did I know the company had built a great piece of technology and was at the point where they'd found product market fit and were really ready to kind of expand and grow the business. So I led the marketing team there for 5 years, had a very successful startup run. We went from really square one to about $15 million in revenue over the 5 years that I was there. Grew the company to about 140 employees, and I just learned a ton along the way. So as part of that startup ride, I very much fell in love with startups, fell in love with growth, got an opportunity to cut my teeth working with a much more experienced team. And I tell people all the time, I sort of had the benefit of starting my career in a place where I saw a technology startup done right, if you will. Not that there's one way to skin a cat, but after I had been at Buildium for 5 years, I felt like I just needed to diversify my experience. It was very much my first job out of college. So I've led marketing at 2 or 3 venture-backed startups after that. And at this point, I've been working for the last 3.5 years on a startup of my own, which is called Outseta. And Outseta ultimately is a response to my experience at Buildium. When I was at Buildium, one of the company's co-founders, his name is Dimitri. He's now my co-founder at Outseta, but he was the CTO. And at the time, we were a rapidly scaling young technology startup. And I was kind of tugging on Dimitri's sleeves saying, hey, we've gotten to the point where we need to go out and buy a billing system. We need a marketing automation product like HubSpot. We need something like Zendesk for customer support. And we just reflected on all those technology decisions that we made as an early stage company. And we were, constantly evaluating new products, constantly integrating new products. There were always, maintenance associated with those integrations. And we realized that for an early stage company that is, bootstrapped and doesn't have unlimited resources, there was a lot of technical and financial overhead there. When nearly every early stage SaaS business needs the same core set of tools. So that's what we're building at Outseta. At its core, it's a billing system, a CRM, but then a series of customer messaging tools as well.
Very impressive. So what has been your experience with remote employment, both as an employer and an employee?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the first 3 years of my career, I was working at Buildium in their office in Boston. And I got to a point just on a personal level where I had spent my whole life in the Boston area, wanted to check out the West Coast in particular. But I found myself up against a rock and a hard place because I had found this company in Buildium that I was very much in love with. I loved working there. The company was going, really, really well at the time. And I had just sort of endless opportunity in front of me, but at the same time, it was a co-located organization. And I knew on a personal level that I did want to move to, in this case, San Diego, California. So one day, very nervously, I went into my boss's office and I explained to them that moving across the country was something that I wanted to do, and basically asked for their blessing. Knowing that if I didn't get it, I was going to leave a job that I was really, really excited and passionate about. Luckily for me, I was sort of granted the ability to do that. So I worked for the next 2 years remotely for Buildium, and flew back and forth across the coast probably twice a quarter, just to make sure I could still meet with my team and be there for board meetings and those sorts of things. But I've been working remotely ever since, both as a remote employee in the context of Buildium, and now at Outseta. We've built a completely remote company and have a 100% distributed team. So a lot of people talk about remote being, the future of work. It's been sort of the reality of work for me for 7 or 8 years now.
Wow. So at Outseta, are your remote employees all US, or are they all over the world?
Right now, they all do happen to be US based. We're still a small team, but we're totally open to hiring globally. I do think there are instances where it helps to be in the same series of time zones or closer than others. But we're certainly looking to hire talent all over the globe.
Oh, cool. So what was your takeaway from it? I mean, going from that 9 to 5 in the office, all of a sudden having that, I'm not going to say freedom, but, moving to another city, 3,000 miles away, and not having an office.
Yeah. At first, a lot of people, myself included, were like, you're going to be on an island out there in California. How are you going to just get work done? And quite frankly, I moved to the beach in San Diego. I had a window that stared out at the beach, and I was about 30 feet from the ocean, and it was, it's San Diego. It's 73 degrees and sunny every single day. So for the first, couple of weeks that I started working remotely, it was tough looking out that window and getting myself to remain disciplined and get work done. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that really has made remote work, I don't want to say easy for me, but it's never been too much of a challenge, is I work for largely early stage startups. And in the context of an early stage startup, there's nowhere to hide. If I'm not doing my job and I'm a one-person marketing department, it's going to be very, very obvious. So I think by the very nature of working for early stage startups, you have to be accountable, you have to be responsible, you have to be self-motivated. And ultimately, I think the interesting part is the fact that my employer at that time gave me the freedom to work remotely was one of the most motivating things that ever happened to me in my career. They could have absolutely said, you know what, Jeff, you've got a team of 15 people here in Boston. We're not going to let you do that. And that would have just, killed my motivation on all fronts. I probably never worked harder than the first year after I started working remotely for Buildium. And I think that's ultimately sort of been a highlight of my experience.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, first of all, there's never a shortage of things to do with early startups. So
for sure. Yeah.
if you're not busy, it's your fault.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is people talk so much about all the different benefits of remote, and remote is, a circumstance that lends itself to sort of deep individual work better than being in an office and those sorts of things. And I've always realized those benefits, and those benefits are important. But to me, it's always boiled down to remote is just a better quality of life for yourself, for employees, across the board. And my mindset 100% is you get better performance out of your employees when you treat them like people and care about them like people. And if you put that first and, sort of front and center, it's actually going to drive performance, which I think is oftentimes lost in this conversation about remote work.
Yeah, I've been doing it for over 10 years now. And there's days when, at 5 o'clock, I'm like, oh my God, it's 5 o'clock,
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You lose track of time because you're just
all the time.
To do.
Yep.
And do you think it helped that you already had a relationship with your team when you made the move? You think it would have been harder if you would come on as a remote employee?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. And that's a tough problem to solve. I think that is one of the bigger issues with remote working. I had this context of when I started working remotely, at Buildium specifically, at least, I had, relationships with my team. I had relationships with my bosses. There was, and I had done it long enough. There was implicit trust there. And I think that's ultimately why I was given that freedom and why it was a successful thing in the first place. But since then, both in hiring remote employees and being hired as a remote employee, that's something I've tried to be really, really proactive with. And particularly in my case, even over the last few years, as we've been growing Outseta, I've done consulting and work for other companies focused on marketing, focused on growth. But I've come into organizations as a remote employee where I don't know anybody. I'm brand new. I got the job via an interview like anyone else. But I think particularly being in a marketing role, you need to go overboard to build those relationships and build that trust however you can. And a big part of that is, as a marketer, I'm typically reporting, or I was reporting to a CEO. I've got control of a budget that's substantial. I'm largely tasked with growth. How do you build trust with somebody remotely that you spend very little time with and get them to be comfortable, giving you the purse strings, so to speak?
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer there. I definitely think, leaning into KPIs and metrics and being really, really clear on how your performance is going to be judged and all those sorts of things help. But I think more than anything else, it is a matter of, sure, remote work is great, and remote work comes with all these benefits, but you better damn well take every opportunity that you can to actually still meet your team in person and spend time together in person, whether it's quarterly offsites or whatever you tend to do at your company. Make the most of the in-person time that you do have.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was no shortage of people wanting to come visit you in San Diego in the winter,
yes,
in Boston, right?
It's always a popular destination. Yes.
Yeah, we get similar weather to you up here. Yours is probably a little bit warmer than us here in the Bay Area, but as I tell
Still
people,
pretty good.
yeah, they're both pretty nice.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
Yeah, I think, I think obviously we've just seen in the wake of COVID, obviously the remote work trend has just been greatly accelerated. I think it's unfortunate. It took a global pandemic for so many companies to kind of wake up and say, this is something we can make work. This is something that's important to our employees. But I think you'll see that much more remote work coming out of this, which is great. I do think, just two other thoughts. One is there's so much talk of remote as the future of work. And in an industry like tech, it is. But people seem to forget that there are entire industries, whether you're a police officer or a firefighter or a teacher or a healthcare worker, that don't lend themselves to remote work. So remote work is the future of work for those of us that are lucky to work in a field that lends itself to remote work. But for many people, it's not. And in terms of how we can make it more effective for everybody, I think a lot of it right now is a learning curve. I think with all these new people sort of entering the remote workforce, there is going to be a learning curve as people just get accustomed to getting on Zoom calls like this and doing that in an efficient way and all of that. But one of the things I've been thinking a lot about recently is exactly what you said. How can you make remote work more effective? And one of the things I've been trying to lean into is I spend, not all day, every day in meetings, but lots of meetings like this. And in a lot of those meetings, it's one person, whether it's me or someone else, sort of reporting out and everybody else listening. And one of the things I'm trying to realize more and more is which meetings are scheduled that are not going to be that collaborative. And if it is me reporting on something and sort of talking to a group, you can just pre-record a video where you share that same information. You don't communicate, or you do communicate asynchronously. And oftentimes that's going to be much more effective because everyone can kind of sit down in their own time, hear your message, digest it, not have all the distractions that sometimes come with a large number of people being on a Zoom call. So as great as Zoom is, I'm looking for opportunities wherever I can find them to just send sort of personalized videos that can be consumed in their own time.
That's actually a really good idea. So Yeah, we talked about the pandemic a little bit, and that caused everybody to go remote in basically the United States in mid-March. Did that cause
Sure.
any roadblocks or challenges for Outseta that you didn't expect?
Um, to be honest with you, not really. We have a relatively small team, so I think remote isn't that difficult for us anyways, and we've all been working remotely for a long time. It hasn't really changed anything about how we operate as a result.
Cool. So, and now that we're talking about Outseta, I mean, what is the story of Outseta? What is your product? Who are your customers? All those things.
Sure. So our startups are early stage subscription businesses and most often SaaS businesses. And the product was basically born out of my experience and my co-founder Dimitri's experience at this other company I mentioned, Buildium, where over a 5-year period that I was there, we scaled from a very early stage startup to $15 million in revenue. And we just looked at the technology decisions that we made across that journey. And it included everything from buying HubSpot for marketing automation to buying something like Zuora for a subscription billing system, Zendesk for help desk. Sort of the SaaS playbook and the products that all these companies tend to piece together. But when we reflected on the early part of that journey, the first few years in particular, we were a small team. We were resource constrained. We were constantly evaluating these different software products. There was technical work that my co-founder Dimitri was biting off to integrate these products. There's always maintenance to make sure data is, passing through these systems effectively. And there's a lot of overhead there, both technical and financial. So the idea behind Outseta is, what are the common denominator software products that every early stage SaaS business needs to buy and needs to use to sort of grow and launch their business? And as we looked at our own experience and talked to other founders, we found the common denominators to be a billing system to charge your customers, CRM to store your prospect and customer data, and then what I'll broadly call customer messaging tools. So marketing automation, email, help desk, those sorts of things. So Outseta is basically an all-in-one tech stack for an early stage SaaS business that gives you all of that functionality. And the premise is basically, if you compare us to the point solutions that we compete against, we might not have all the bells and whistles, but we have the 80% of the functionality that's sort of most important, particularly to an early stage customer. And by allowing you to sort of manage and operate your entire business from within one product, from behind one login, you get rid of a lot of that technical and financial overhead and just have a lot more alignment amongst your team.
Yeah, and I think true. I mean, what you said, 80%, the 80-20 rule applies in most businesses, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what we saw too, we get these questions all the time, like, why would I make sacrifices and use your product, and the 80-20 rule. That last 20% that we don't have oftentimes is features that are going to help you move up market. We're very specifically serving the lower end of this market. We're not building features to help companies go dramatically up market. And a lot of the other times it's integrations with other tools. And our premise is, we've built the core tools that you need. Yes, we have an open API, but we're not building integrations with lots of other platforms, because all the core tools you need are right here. So the example or one of the examples I like to use is, if you go and you use MailChimp for email marketing, they're going to give you 300 email templates. How many are you actually going to use? We offer 3 email templates or the ability to design your own. And there's decisions like that we've made consistently that show, we don't have true feature parity, but at an early stage, is that going to show up, on the balance sheet? Is it going to make a big difference in your business? We don't think so.
No, actually, at early stage, you just want to get stuff going quickly.
Absolutely.
Think of the amount of time it takes to look through 300 templates.
Yep, that's exactly right.
I would agree. And then when they get to that point, then they can make that decision. And a lot of times when they get to that point, they actually outgrow a MailChimp too, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups. So we're kind of in a similar industry, except we do it from a different aspect. How important do you think it will be in the future for companies like Gaper for when the people actually need developers and they need them now?
Yeah, I think it's critically important, and this is something that's near and dear to my life too. So I've been working with another company called Qualified, which is a platform that helps you essentially hire engineers remotely. It's not a competitive product with Gaper. It's more a series of coding assessments that you can use to help capture work samples from developers and have them demonstrate that they have particular skills prior to hiring them. But I've lived, in a similar sphere for a long time. And I think that remote offers an entirely new set of challenges when it comes to hiring. First and foremost, you're not going to have the benefit of oftentimes meeting that person face to face. So I think it does call for you to hire even slower. And I mean slower in a positive connotation than maybe you would have before. You do need to be very deliberate about who you're hiring. I think you do need to, build a more rigorous interview process where you can sort of validate that these people not only have particular skills that you need them to have in the context of what technologies they know or whatnot, but also to the extent you can probe during the interview process on what this person is actually like to work with and what their soft skills are and all those sorts of things. So remote, opens up your talent pool. It gives you a ton of benefits in that area, but I think you do need to be that much more deliberate with your hiring process. And I think most companies, this is relatively new ground for them. They're trying to figure out, how do we build this new process that's going to, surface more qualified candidates that are going to fit in and work with this team well. And for me, that's a good thing. I've always been a huge proponent of talent acquisition, human resources, people ops, whatever you want to call it. I've always kind of pointed out, people are quick to talk about the importance of team and the importance of, the talent that you bring onto your team. But if you look at any tech company out there and you look at the effort that they put into building their hiring process, as opposed to the effort they put into building their sales process, for example, it's not even close.
Yeah.
So I think, a positive benefit of this is I think it is going to focus or force companies to put a lot more thought into how they hire remote employees. And that's probably ultimately a good thing.
Yes, I agree with you. I think it is. And it's really more to find the right person or people for the job, not necessarily the most local or the most convenient.
Exactly. And I mean, the most commonly cited benefit of hiring remotely is you open up that talent pool globally, and that's 100% true. And I have countless examples from my career where if we were forced to hire people just locally, the cost would have been exceedingly high. The talent would have been not nearly what we found elsewhere. And that's just a no-brainer to me.
Yes. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been very informative. I wish you good luck with Outseta, and have a great weekend in this beautiful West Coast.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Have a great day.
Take care.